In 1994, a road crew cutting through the limestone bedrock on the south side of the Cockpit Country in the parish of Trelawney broke through the floor of what they thought was a shallow drainage channel. The machine dropped half a meter before the operator killed the engine. They sent a man down with a flashlight. He came back up and said nothing for a while. Then he said the tunnel went further than the light reached. That site was logged, fenced, and handed to the relevant authorities. The full report from that handover has never been published. What follows is the record of what has been found beneath Jamaica in the years since. Some of it officially documented, some of it in unpublished field notes, and some of it known only because the people who went down the shafts eventually talked to the people who wrote it down. The tunnels are real. The structures inside some of them are real. And the problem, the reason this has not been quietly explained away, is the age. These tunnels predate every civilization that history says was here. If that is the kind of thing that keeps you watching, the subscribe button is right there. This channel documents the unexplained beneath the Caribbean one site at a time. And what is coming in the next 25 minutes is the most concentrated case for underground prehistory on any island in the region. We start with the ground itself, because the ground is the reason this is possible at all. Jamaica is a karst island. Rainwater absorbs carbon dioxide from the air and the soil and becomes weakly acidic. That water moves through limestone, and limestone dissolves. Not quickly, not in any time frame a human notices, but over tens of thousands of years the rock hollows. Passages form, chambers open. River systems establish themselves entirely underground and carve conduits that a person could walk through. The island has been doing this for approximately 30 million years. The result is that beneath the visible surface of Jamaica, particularly beneath the interior parishes of Trelawney, St. Catherine, Manchester, and Clarendon, there is a second geography, a parallel landscape of passages, shafts, chambers, and flooded conduits that the surface maps do not show and that no one has fully inventoried. The Geological Survey Division has documented portions of it. The Jamaica Caving Club has explored portions of it. No one has the complete picture, and every team that goes in finds extensions that were not on the maps from the previous team. This is the substrate beneath the tunnel question. The passages exist. The geology created them. The question is what happened inside them, who modified them, and when. That question becomes much more difficult when you start looking at the evidence of deliberate human construction inside sections of the network that should, by every accepted timeline, have been empty of human presence when that construction occurred. The printed circuit, what the Jamaica Caving Club informally called a section of linked passages in the Cockpit Country interior, was first entered formally in 1982 by a team that included Colin Rickards and 3 members from a visiting British university group. The name came from the branching pattern of the passages as seen from above on the survey sketch. They mapped approximately 900 meters of connected tunnel in that first season, with several branches left incomplete because the water level had risen. They noted cut marks on the walls of 3 passage sections and a stone platform in one of the larger chambers that had clearly been assembled from pieces that did not originate in the chamber itself. The stones had been carried in. The platform was low, roughly 40 centimeters above the cave floor, flat enough to serve as a working surface or a resting surface or an altar, depending on what your assumptions are going in. The survey from that season sits in the records of the Jamaica Caving Club. Rickards published a summary in the club's bulletin in 1983. The cut marks and the platform were noted. No follow-up excavation was conducted. A different team resurveyed in 1991, extending the mapped network by another 400 meters. They found 2 additional sections with wall modifications, including one area where the passage ceiling had been lowered to a uniform height of approximately 1.8 meters for a run of roughly 30 meters. Someone had gone to considerable effort to make that section of tunnel walkable at standing height. The 1991 team included a geologist whose assessment, held in an unpublished report at the University of the West Indies, was that the ceiling modification was not a natural feature. The rock had been worked. The tools left strike marks she described as consistent with stone implements rather than metal. She declined to put a date to it. The report recommended further investigation. That investigation has not happened. The printed circuit is accessible today to experienced cavers with a local guide. It is not marked on any tourist map. The platform is still in the chamber. The lowered ceiling section is still there. In the parish of St. Elizabeth, on the western slopes above the Black River drainage, there is a cave system locally known by a name that translates approximately as the place where they counted. No one knows the origin of that name or why it was given. The cave was known to local farmers for generations. A goat had gone down a sinkhole entrance in the 1930s, and the farmer who went looking found passages. His grandson led a caving team to the entrance in 1977. That team mapped 2 main passages and a side chamber over 3 visits. The chamber contained a deposit they could not immediately explain. Along one wall, at floor level, there was a line of rounded river stones, each roughly the size of a human fist, arranged in a row that ran for approximately 6 meters. The stones were not native to the cave. River cobbles of that size do not occur naturally in limestone solution caves. They had been carried in from an exterior river source, which in that part of St. Elizabeth meant a journey of at least 4 kilometers. Someone had moved roughly 200 stones into the interior of a cave, accessible only by climbing down a narrow entrance shaft, arranged them in a precise line along a wall, and then left. The line of stones was photographed. The photographs are in the club archive. No one has excavated beneath the stone line. No one has dated the deposit. The question of what the stones were marking has not been answered. 40 kilometers northeast of that site, in the interior hills of Clarendon, a farmer expanding a drainage ditch in 2006 broke into a void beneath his land. He went in with a lamp and found a small chamber, roughly 4 meters by 3 meters, with a ceiling low enough that he could not stand upright. On the floor were the remains of what had once been a wooden structure, rotted to near nothing, but the pattern of decay was clear enough that a carpenter who went down on a second visit said the arrangement looked like the base of a storage platform. Beside the wood were fragments of plain-fired clay, not painted or decorated, and on one wall, cut into the limestone with something sharp, there were lines, not random. Parallel lines grouped in sets with a diagonal cut crossing each group of 5. Tally marks. The farmer contacted the Jamaica National Heritage Trust. An officer visited the site. The clay fragments were taken for analysis. The wooden remains were sampled for radiocarbon dating. The result of that dating, if it was ever completed, has not appeared in any published source this research could locate. What is documented in a local newspaper account from 2007 is that the officer described the site as significant and said further investigation was planned. No further investigation has been publicly reported. The tally marks are still on the wall. The chamber is still there, on private farmland, covered with a piece of corrugated zinc sheeting that the farmer placed over the entrance to keep the cattle out. These 3 sites share a characteristic that becomes more significant the longer you look at it. None of them are explained by the standard archaeological history of Jamaica. The Taino, who were the island's population when Columbus arrived in 1494, used caves extensively. The evidence for Taino cave use across Jamaica is documented at more than 100 sites. Petroglyphs, pictographs, ceremonial deposits, human remains. Taino relationship to cave space was religious and functional, and the record of it is clear. But Taino material culture is identifiable. Taino ceramics have a recognizable style. Taino rock art has characteristics that specialists can place within the regional tradition. Taino occupation of Jamaica is reliably dated to approximately the 7th century after Christ, meaning the culture arrived on the island around 650 years into the Common Era. The problem with all 3 sites is that none of them look Taino. The clay fragments from Clarendon were described by the Heritage Trust officer as pre-ceramic in character, lacking the decorative traditions associated with Taino pottery. The stone line in St. Elizabeth was not accompanied by any ceramic material at all, and the cut marks in the printed circuit were assessed as having been made with stone tools, not the worked shell and bone implements associated with the Taino period. Pre-ceramic. That word carries weight in Caribbean archaeology. It points to a population that predates the ceramic-using cultures entirely. The accepted model holds that Jamaica's archaic population was present on the island from roughly 4,000 years before the Common Era, and persisted until displaced or absorbed by ceramic-using peoples arriving from South America around 2,000 years ago. The archaic people did not make pottery. They did use caves. and they left almost no above-ground record on Jamaica. What they left underground is the part of the picture that is still being assembled. The first coherent argument that Jamaica's cave modification record might extend into the Archaic period was made in a paper delivered at a conference in Barbados in 2012. The researcher, whose work focused on pre-ceramic sites across the Northern Caribbean, proposed that deliberate structural modification of karst passages on Jamaica was occurring at a period that predated the Taino by at minimum 1,000 years, and possibly much more. The paper was not widely circulated and does not appear to have been formally published in a peer-reviewed journal. But the argument it makes is coherent, and the evidence it points to has not been formally refuted. The argument rests on three pillars. First, the stone tool signature. Strike marks consistent with stone rather than metal or shell tools point to a period before the worked shell technology associated with ceramic period cultures. Second, the absence of ceramic association. Every site with unexplained tunnel modifications lacks the ceramic deposits that would anchor it to the Taino or post-Taino period. Third, the speleothem evidence. Speleothems are cave formations, stalactites, stalagmites, flowstone, mineral deposits that build when water moves through cave passages over long periods. In Jamaican limestone caves, the general rate for flowstone deposition is roughly 1 millimeter per century. In the printed circuit, the stone platform has flowstone deposits on its upper surface. A report shared within the Caving Club network estimated the flowstone at a thickness consistent with several centuries of deposition at minimum. If the platform was placed in the cave and then left undisturbed, the flowstone would have begun accumulating immediately. A deposit that reads as several centuries old implies the platform has been there at least that long. The uncertainty around the exact local deposition rate is why the question has not been closed. In the Blue Mountains in the parish of Portland, at an elevation above the tree line where the forest gives way to high cloud scrub, there is a passage entrance known to the maroon communities of the eastern interior, long before any outside researcher found it. The Maroons called it, in translation, the throat of the hill, and it appears in oral accounts collected by Maroon historians as a place used during the resistance period of the 1730s and 1740s, when the communities of the Blue Mountains were actively fighting the British colonial forces. The passage goes down. A team from the University of the West Indies entered it in 2003 and mapped approximately 300 meters of passageway before the passage became too narrow for safe progress. At the upper levels, there was material clearly maroon in period: charcoal, bone fragments, iron scraps consistent with musket ball production, and a small deposit of worked leather. The maroon use of the passage was documented and dated, but as the team moved deeper and lower, the maroon material disappeared, and what replaced it was something older. Stone arrangements on the passage floor, a section of wall where the rock had been smoothed to a degree inconsistent with natural weathering, and at approximately 180 meters from the entrance, a carved face. Not a Taino face. The Taino carved face tradition has a recognizable aesthetic: large eyes and defined brow, carved in a style that specialist researchers can identify across multiple sites. This face was different. The features were more schematic, less naturalistic, more in keeping with the geometric reduction style associated with Archaic-period rock art elsewhere in the Caribbean, particularly in cave systems of the Dominican Republic tentatively assigned to the pre-ceramic period. The researchers noted it. They photographed it. The report from that field season describes the face as anomalous in the context of the passage's maroon occupation layer and potentially indicative of earlier human presence. The phrase they used was potentially indicative, which is the academic equivalent of "we do not know what to do with this yet." The face is still on the wall. The passage is still there. The maroon communities who know its location consider it a sensitive site. Further research has proceeded only with their involvement and approval, which means the detailed investigation the anomalous features warrant has moved slowly. Off the southern coast of Jamaica, in water accessible by free diving, but deep enough to require equipment for extended survey work, there are features on the seafloor that have been generating quiet conversation among researchers in the region since at least the 1990s. They appear to be the mouths of flooded karst passages, the underwater entrances to a drowned cave system that was accessible from land at a time when sea levels were lower than they are today. During the last glacial maximum, approximately 20,000 years ago, what is now submerged coastal shelf would have been dry land, and the karst systems beneath it would have had their entrances above the waterline. Most Caribbean archaeologists would say no one was living on Jamaica 20,000 years ago. The accepted earliest date for human presence on the island is the Archaic-period, but that date is based on the material evidence that has been found. Most of the potential occupation sites from the glacial period are now underwater. They have not been surveyed. What is under the water is not known. The passage mouths off the southern coast have been noted and photographed. They have not been formally excavated. The question of what those passages contain has not been answered. They are still there on the harbor floor, open, unmapped, leading into a system that no one has gone through. In the boundary zone between Manchester and Clarendon, where the limestone is older and thicker than elsewhere on the island, the cave systems are correspondingly more extensive. A deeper section of the karst near the Worthy Park area, accessed through sinkhole entrances on the western edge of the property, contains a passage network that includes sections where the human modification evidence is both clear and difficult to account for. A team that entered the system in 2015 mapped a lateral passage at approximately 40 meters below the surface that ran for roughly 200 meters before terminating at a collapse zone. Along approximately 60 meters of that passage, the floor had been deliberately leveled. Not the way water action levels a cave floor, which leaves characteristic erosion patterns. The leveling here was mechanical. The breakdown material, the chunks of limestone that naturally fall from cave ceilings, had been cleared from the floor and stacked against the walls. The floor beneath was smooth and flat, and in several places showed marks consistent with regular foot traffic, areas where the surface had been worn by repeated contact. This is a floor that was used. Someone cleared it, maintained it, and walked on it over a period long enough to wear the surface. The breakdown pile against the walls of that passage was tested for organic content in 2016. A small sample returned a radiocarbon date placing it somewhere between 1800 and 2300 years before the present. The breakdown pile was present when the floor was cleared, meaning the floor clearance happened at or before that date. The floor of that passage was in use approximately 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years ago on Jamaica was the transitional period between the late Archaic and the earliest ceramic-using populations. What is not debated is that this was not a period when anyone on Jamaica was constructing and maintaining underground passageways at 40 meters of depth. There is no model for that activity in the accepted record. The 2015 team reported their findings to the Jamaica National Heritage Trust and to the University of the West Indies. A follow-up visit was made in 2017, at which point additional sediment samples were collected from the passage floor. The analysis of those samples has not been published. The floor is still there. The breakdown piles are still against the walls. The passage is still accessible, though entry requires ropes and experience. There is a pattern in all of this, and naming the pattern is not the same as explaining it. Across multiple unconnected locations in the interior parishes of Jamaica, in karst passage systems that have been known to cavers and researchers for decades, there is evidence of deliberate human activity in underground spaces that the standard timeline of Jamaican prehistory cannot easily accommodate. A line of carried stones, a cleared floor, a lowered ceiling maintained at walking height for 30 meters, a stone platform with speleothem growth on its surface. The material associations are consistently pre-ceramic. The radiocarbon evidence points to dates that sit in the Archaic transition or earlier. No single one of these sites taken in isolation would overturn the accepted model. But the pattern across 7 distinct sites in 4 parishes, all pointing in the same direction, is harder to dismiss as coincidence. Coincidences accumulate. At some point, enough coincidences in the same direction stop being coincidences. The researchers who have worked these sites understand this. The reluctance to make stronger claims is not ignorance. It is the appropriate caution of people who know what the implications are if the claims are made and cannot be fully supported. Making it conclusive would require the kind of systematic, well-funded, multi-season investigation that has not yet happened. And the answers to why it has not happened are largely mundane. Funding for Caribbean prehistory is limited. Jamaica's above-ground archaeological sites, the Taino villages, the Spanish colonial structures, the plantation period remains, compete for the same scarce institutional resources. Cave archaeology is logistically difficult and expensive. There is also the question of what a more complete investigation might find. The current model places organized human settlement on Jamaica starting around 4,000 years before the Common Era. If the tunnel modifications date to earlier periods, the question of who made them becomes acute. The Caribbean basin was not empty in the period before the Archaic migrations. The continent to the south was populated. Coastal navigation in the pre-ceramic period is documented elsewhere, in the Americas. Whether earlier populations reached Jamaica and left a record in the only places that survived deep time, the underground spaces protected from erosion and burial, is not an unreasonable question. It is simply one that has not been answered. The Cockpit Country sits over the densest concentration of unexcavated karst passages on the island. The maroon communities who have lived in and around it for 3 centuries know the landscape in ways that no outside survey team has fully documented. Some of the passage entrances that the maroon oral tradition references have never been formally located by researchers. 2,000 years before the present, 4,000 years, 30 million years of dissolving limestone. These timescales operate simultaneously beneath the surface of a karst island, and the traces that each period leaves are layered in the same passage, sometimes meters apart, sometimes separated only by a change in the chemistry of the sediment on the floor. Reading those layers requires time, funding, expertise, and the willingness to accept what they actually say, even when what they say does not fit the model that the last generation of researchers built. The most recent piece of the puzzle came in 2023, when a joint team from the University of the West Indies and a partner institution in the United Kingdom conducted a remote sensing survey of the Cockpit Country interior using ground-penetrating radar and airborne LiDAR. LiDAR strips away the vegetative canopy in the digital rendering and shows the bare ground beneath. Applied to the Cockpit Country interior, it revealed the karst topography in detail that ground-level mapping had never achieved. What the LiDAR data showed was a concentration of void signatures beneath the surface in a section of the interior that had not been entered by any recorded caving expedition. The extent of those networks, based on the radar return data, is larger than any system previously mapped in that part of the parish. The team published their remote sensing results in 2024 and recommended ground truthing, which means sending people down the entrance shafts, if entrance shafts can be located, to see what the passages actually contain. That recommendation is pending. The follow-up field season has not yet been funded. The entrance shafts, if they exist in the locations the radar suggests, have not yet been located on the ground. The system is still down there, unvisited, unmapped, its walls unread. Jamaica's known history begins in the standard account, with Columbus arriving in 1494 and finding the Taino already in residence. The Taino's own history on the island began perhaps 8 centuries before that. The archaic people who preceded them were here for several thousand years before that, and they left traces in the caves and coastal middens that archaeologists have been documenting for generations. What no one has yet fully reckoned with is the possibility that the caves contain a record that goes deeper than the archaic, that the modifications to the passages in the Cockpit Country and in St. Elizabeth and in Manchester and in Portland are the work of people who were here before the people who came before the Taino, in spaces that survived intact because stone and limestone and the dark interior of a karst passage are more durable than any surface site on a tropical island. Every surface site on Jamaica has been worked by the rain, by the roots, by the centuries of agricultural use, by the roads, by the construction. The underground sites have not. What has been protected in the dark, under the limestone, under the karst, under the island, may be the most complete record of how long this island has actually been inhabited by people. That record has not been read yet. It is still down there. Beneath the surface of an island most of the world pictures as a beach, beneath the beaches and the cane fields and the parishes and the roads and the markets and the cities, there is a second Jamaica that runs through the rock, and it is older than anyone has yet been willing to formally say. The people who went down the shafts and came back up and said what they found are on record. The reports are in the archives. The floors are still flat. The marks are still on the walls. The platforms are still in the chambers. The faces are still on the rock. And the passages that the radar found in the Cockpit Country are still waiting for someone to go in with a rope and a light and find out what is in them. That is what is under Jamaica. That is what has not been explained. And that is what is not going away. If you want to see the rest of the Caribbean documented the same way, one site at a time, without the sensationalism and without the shortcuts, this channel is where that work is happening. Subscribe, and you will be here when the next piece comes up. Because the next piece is already in the ground.